This is Inside Mside, your favorite podcast for all things Morningside. Here's stories from students, alumni, faculty, and more about what makes the Morningside experience so special. Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside Mside, where we're talking with individuals, stories, all different kinds of things that truly makes Morningside what it is. It's truly an honor today to be joined by Dr. Bruce Forbes, someone that I have called a friend, a colleague, and was even a professor of mine. So it's exciting to have you here.
It's great to
Bruce,
be here.
Thank you so much for joining. No doubt. Well, and to get started, I wondered if you could just give us an update. Where are you living? What are you up to nowadays?
Well, I'm kind of in motion in terms of where I'm living. I'm transitioning so that eventually I will retire full-time in Minneapolis, but that's not where I am now. So I'm in Sioux City some and in Minneapolis some, and elusive so that people can't track me down.
Yeah, there you go. That transition slowly to retirement.
But my philosophy in all of this is I want to continue doing what I love, but at my own pace, not necessarily some institution's pace. So that means I'm not teaching semester-long courses, but I'm doing a lot of presentations. I do research.
That's right, because you just did a presentation in Sioux City. That's right. It was History at Noon, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
About the history of nativity scenes.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely want to get into that. That's for sure, because I love that part of your story and learning more about that. I think that's anyone listening, knowing for the first time, or even just hearing more about it. I think that's an exciting thing. Well, good. I'm glad that you're enjoying retirement or semi-retirement, if we can call it that. And any amount that we can keep you down in Sioux City closer to Morningside is all the better in my book. So delay that full transition as much as possible. I want to, speaking of Morningside and your tie to this, I actually am very curious sometimes by people's stories of even what brings them to Morningside, because I think sometimes that's a unique experience in itself. So why don't you share as a prospective student, right? As thinking of where you might want to go and what your future looked like. What was that decision like for you?
Yeah, and so what's going unspoken here is it's not just that I taught here for 40 years. I also was an undergraduate here. So I'm, when I think of the years and the college presidents and all the rest that I've covered in all that time. I was a student here from 66 to 70. And it's a little hard for me to think what really, you got to edit this.
Because where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm from Mitchell, South Dakota, as we say, home of the world's only corn palace, otherwise known as the world's largest bird feeder.
There you go.
So, and Dakota Wesleyan is in my hometown, but I knew I did not want to stay in my hometown.
Fair.
And I looked at a number of other small private colleges, and I was especially looking at United Methodist colleges then.
Yeah.
And Morningside, I thought, was really outstanding, especially in the humanities, but really overall. And I have to say, this sounds like bragging about my own group, but I didn't realize when I was here that I was really here in the golden age of Morningside. My class is 1970. All kinds of my classmates, their names are on buildings around here. And there was a period of time when this is recently, almost half of the board were class of 1970. So it was you
were in good company.
There you go. It was, and those other people made more money than I did. But it was outstanding because of the students there. Here, it was outstanding faculty with a national reputation, with all kinds of things. And, schools have ups and downs, and so has Morningside. And I would quickly say, I'm really happy to say that now Morningside's in a new golden age that even surpasses the one I was in. But I was really fortunate to be there at a special time. And so I got those vibes, and
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to make an assumption, but I'm assuming you came and studied religion here then. I mean, was that kind of your major, or you tried different things in different classes?
I was undecided what my major would be, but I ended up getting a double major, one in religion and one in philosophy, and a minor in French.
Oh, okay.
Because at that time, I was thinking about ministry, but I didn't think I wanted to be in a local church. I thought there must be other kinds of ministry, chaplains and other things.
Yeah.
And the other thing I knew from an early age is that I was interested in teaching. I have the memory of when I was in even junior high or middle school, I would study for tests by pretending I was teaching someone else. So,
Wow.
so when I entered college, I thought, I'm kind of religiously interested, but I am also interested in teaching, and I would just like a school that would give me breadth and would train me for all that. And we had great, great people, and it was a wonderful experience. You know, when I think about this, I try to think of how much times have changed.
Yeah.
And some of that much for the better, because times weren't so good back then. And I don't know, just the pluses and minuses. One thing that I tell my students is, you know, when I was a student here, the women had hours that they had to be in the dorm by a certain time, and the men didn't. Now tell me how that would fly today.
Yeah.
And I don't know what people were thinking. They think they locked up all the women and the men wouldn't get in trouble. And I'm not sure that was true. But I think of how much that even started to change while I was a student here.
Cultural evolution.
Yeah. The culture has changed a lot. But in addition, we were a progressive campus. It was in the middle of Vietnam War and anti-Vietnam protests and all the rest. And we had students who said, we want to have a voice in the governing of this campus. So it was in my time here that Morningside students campaigned to have the student government president be on the board of directors of the college with a vote.
Wow.
And there are lots of colleges that still do not have that.
I had no idea that was when that was kind of instated.
Yeah, it was in kind of student activism days.
Yeah.
But we said, you know, instead of just having students as an onlooker, you should have the student body president there as a voting member of the board, which continues now.
And was that met with any resistance? Or, I mean, it just made sense. I mean,
the leadership of the time was persuaded of that, and I was happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I went on for a master's degree at Southern Methodist University, and they did not have that. I mean, that's so a major university.
Well, and I know we'll get to it a little bit later talking about the new president, but gosh, going through that entire search and that whole program, you know, with the board president and having a student on there as a voting member, giving their input. Yeah. I know that was instrumental, especially in this search process. Right. And to think that it started back when you were going to school here.
So you got to say, I mean, Morningside was a college ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And in fact, ahead of some colleges still haven't caught up to that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Or recognizes the value that perspective might have.
Right.
That's for sure. So what kind of student was Dr. Bruce Forbes? or not yet doctor, at least Bruce Forbes?
I was a good student. I got good grades. In fact, all A's. The only not A I got was a B+ in physical education.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess I didn't climb the ropes to the ceiling well enough.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was. So, yeah, I was a good student. And it's kind of funny because later on as I taught, and people would talk about, students aren't preparing well for reading or writing in high school. And how do you compare the reading of college students back then to now?
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know, because I was only reading my own papers. Yeah. Whereas when I'm a faculty member, I'm reading all kinds of student papers with a great breadth of ability.
Perspectives, backgrounds, abilities, all of those things. Yeah.
But it was a time when, it was a time of idealism, some counterculture, all the rest. But I think there are lots of people who had dreams for changing society and so on. I mean, we were a dreamer group of people.
Yeah.
And my hope over the years, I hope it's been that way, is that sometimes life changes that and you give up on your dreams. But I think a lot of our generation still lives with that.
Well, and I think had a vision for what the future could be and would be. I mean, you said a lot of your classmates have names on these buildings or have left their mark on campus, much how you have. And I think that's a testimony, or a testament to at least the change that was occurring, the vision that you had and the experience that you had.
The dreams were also about changes of society, and so issues of race and issues of, peace, especially in the Vietnam era and that, they drove a lot of us. We're not kind of skipping around chronologically a little, but I didn't fully realize until later when I was teaching here that the people right before me, it's like the seniors were still around from that. The Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on Selma.
Yeah.
We sent, I don't know the exact number, 16 Morningside students who were there and participated in the Selma March.
Wow.
And when I was a freshman, there are 2 or 3 students who were seniors at that time who, it happened before I got here, but I mean, there's that kind of thing that was going on campus as well.
Yeah, just an activism.
Yeah, we wanted to be personally successes, and we wanted to change the world.
Yeah. Wow, I had never heard that before. That's activism right there. I mean, going across the country and, I mean, I think that that's really taken a stand, but not only how things are changing maybe in the world or in our country, but also then looking at Morningside and saying, we want representation and we want to make sure that we have, as students, have a voice on the board. I mean, things were changing in that regard as well.
Exactly.
So you're getting ready to graduate. You said, at least when you were going to school or when you had started, that you weren't sure whether you just wanted to be a pastor at a local congregation, or you were going to be a chaplain, or you had that itch to be a teacher. When did that kind of start to take shape?
Well, what I decided is I'm going to get both degrees, so I keep all the doors open. So
There
I
you go,
decided I would go straight to seminary
Okay.
and get that degree and become ordained. And then I thought I would go straight on for a doctoral program, a PhD.
Oh,
And I did all that. People were surprised. They said, most people, if you do that, you take a couple of years out, you stop out or whatever. No, I just kept going straight on. So I decided to go to seminary, and I went to Perkins School of Theology, which is part of Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
So major university, also very strong seminary. And then after that, I went to Princeton Theological Seminary for my doctorate. And those are all outstanding places. And it was growing up in the Midwest, because I grew up in Mitchell, and so I stayed in the Midwest for college. So I experienced the South and I experienced the East Coast. All of that was.
I was going to say, then, you became a traveler. I mean, you went to programs all over the country. Then.
And sometimes I think I learned as much being outside of the classroom as I did in.
Yeah.
In a way, being those schools, I've kind of learned what being a Midwesterner was. And by the way, notice I'm back here, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes I think you don't know what your context is until you're outside of the context and can see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, sure.
So I loved my time in Dallas, and I loved my time on the East Coast, but notice where I ended up.
Well, and you then somewhat have an appreciation for maybe the area that you were raised, or even like you said, where you did your undergraduate work. I think you see that in society today. I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're talking about, but I think you can see that students or kids say, oh my gosh, I'm never sticking around my hometown, or I got to move, I got to get out of here, that angst. And then they get out of there, and maybe they go to school far away, or they have experiences, and then then they have that opportunity to maybe come home, whether they want to have a career or a family, or what is that.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, when people are thinking about graduate schools, I say, well, that's a perfect time to experiment, because you aren't locked in. I mean, in other words, if I'm going to go to a 2-year program or a 3-year program, I'm going to be there that long. And then I can come back home, or I can go stay there, or I can go somewhere else.
Go a different direction.
So graduate school in different places in the country is a way to experiment,
I like that perspective, yeah. And so then what did it look like after Princeton and that program? Then you made your way back to the Midwest?
Well, and I was still trying to decide, and I had job offers in both teaching and pretty big church opportunities. And the position opened up here that was half-time campus minister and half-time faculty member.
Look at that.
Bruce delays decisions as much as possible.
Yes.
I guess is what it was.
Until the right opportunity opens up.
So I followed Ralph Brink, and he was my campus minister. And so it was an honor to follow him here. And in fact, the first religious studies course I took was from him, because he was teaching half-time or part-time.
Yeah.
And so I came here, and it looked like I didn't have to decide.
Yeah, exactly.
But then what happened? And I loved it, and I think both of them were successful. Except what I learned is that 50% and 50%, really, it doesn't add up. It's like 90% and 90%. In other words, you really can't do full-time work in both of them. And so eventually, Robert Jewett, who's, I keep saying the most published faculty member ever to teach at Morningside, he was my professor. And then I came back, and he was my colleague now, because he was teaching here. But when he left and that position opened up, then I applied for that. So I moved over into full-time teaching.
Faculty.
And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea that it started as that half and half. I mean, that had to make you feel good when you're looking and you're indecisive, the golden opportunity. No kidding.
Yeah.
That's great. Your prayers were answered. That's for sure.
But then, Bruce just procrastinates.
Yeah, one or
the
the other. Yeah, one or the other. So then talk to me about your time as a professor. I mean, it was, gosh, how long were you a professor here?
Well, technically 40 years. I mean, there were times when I took year-long sabbaticals and another leave and so on. But I was here for 40 years. And, one of the nicest things when I retired was that they created, and especially it was Sherry Swan, our administrative assistant, who was key to this. Yeah. This has been done for some other faculty too, but they created a poster, because it is huge, that has, I guess, my little picture at the top, and then it has an alphabetical list of every student who's ever been a student in one of my classes at Morningside College, and that's 5,680 names.
Wow.
And it moves me just to think about that, because it
is.
I've gone through a lot of presidents, a lot of curricula, but the students were always the center of everything. And
decades of impact and influence and working with those young people. Well, what stands out to you, especially early on in your tenure?
Well, beginning, I remember my goal was to be one step, 1 week ahead of the students. Your first year of teaching or so on, you're really scrambling as you develop courses and that.
Yeah.
I have to say about Morningside, one thing I've always loved about it, and there have been times over the years when I've taught weekend college up in the Twin Cities, and when I was on sabbatical, sometimes I would teach at other colleges. There was no other college I'd rather be at than this. And it was because this is a very humane place of faculty among faculty, faculty and students respecting each other, and faculty and student relationships. I've always thought it was really special. And every small college will say that. We're personal and it's like a family and so on. But with some of my experience at other schools, I thought not as much as this. So first of all, it was just a wonderful place to be as a human being. And I loved, the variety of faculty I knew as friends, and the staff who were wonderful, and number one, the students.
Yeah. And so, gosh, over the course of that time, early on, just trying to stay ahead of the curve, make sure you know your material before your students know their material, things like that. Morningside went through a lot of ebb and flows, different times in their history. You spoke to some of that. Anything that jumps out to you, especially, now we're going through a transition of presidency and with John that we've had for 22 years. But prior to that, what stands out to you maybe about those presidencies or those times at Morningside? Because you were a part of the activism and all of that energy that was on campus, and then just trying to get your sea legs as a professor. Then what came next?
Well, there were very, as I think of presidents, I wouldn't really be critical of any of them, but each of them were very different.
Yeah.
And yet, as our most recent president, President Reinders has said, colleges like ours face strong headwinds. And I do think I want to just give testimony to John, because his presidency really shows that leadership makes a difference. And that is why we're in a new golden era. So now that we have a transition to a new president, he is very fortunate to be able to inherit a school that is poised to do even greater things.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other colleges that are looking for presidents, and that's not the same story with them.
Yeah.
And so I thank John for that a lot.
Well, and especially you had to feel some of the pressure. Even when John was first coming to campus, I don't know, but I don't think it was the best kept secret about our financial situation and what was happening. And I got to imagine as a professor, especially in the humanities, even, things like that, where you feel that pressure.
And enrollment, had declined, all of those kinds of things. And often you had to economize because you had to worry about budget and the rest. And I would have occasional friends I mean, like, let's say faculty colleagues at other schools, and they would brag about something. And sometimes, except for I just loved the community, we were struggling with things.
Yeah.
And I would think to myself, I wish I could brag about something. And that's why later, as the recovery happened under President Reinders and so on, I would kind of giggle to myself.
You got
I say,
more and more things.
I can just brag all the time now.
Yeah, more and more things to brag about.
And it is enrollment, but it was also the whole campus was transformed.
Yeah.
In terms of facilities, anyone like in my class who've never been back to this campus, they won't know. You
wouldn't even recognize it.
And by the way, and seeing all these changes, it also sometimes makes me feel old.
Yeah.
My freshman year at Morningside was the year that Epley Auditorium opened. And so in recent years, we said, oh, it's kind of getting run down and it's still going to be Epley, but we need to really, this really badly needs to be refreshed. And I thought, well, what are you saying about me?
We need that was renovation. It's run down. Yeah.
That was the new auditorium when I was a freshman.
Yeah. Wow. I do think often, and I've heard other alumni talk about it and reference just the physical transformation that this campus has went through. I mean, I remember when I was a student here, it wasn't that long ago, but we've lamented or talked about the asphalt parking lot behind Lewis Hall or these new buildings that were constructed. I mean, I remember some of that from my undergrad, even the practice football field down on Bass Field and things like that.
Well, and what's wonderful, I'm looking over in the direction of where the fountain is and that central walkway. I mean, in a way, that's the center of our campus. And it used to be the center of our campus was an ugly asphalt parking lot.
Yeah.
And now, knowing what it is, I just can't believe we stood it that way. Although I have to say, once this, I guess you call the Central Mall with the fountain got built, what we had is students complaining because they wanted to be able to drive right up to every building and park. And now they had to walk a few feet,
Yeah, the grass is greener mentality, right? We don't want the looks of the parking lot, but once you take it away, we want that accessibility too. That's funny. And so, I mean, gosh, thinking about the physical transformation that was going through, obviously the evolution of your teaching and getting into your groove and things like that. I mean, any memories that jump out to you from your teaching days or from the transformation that was happening here? Obviously, we changed even athletics, right? Like you weren't probably going to a ton of those games because we weren't winning a lot. And then that change and some of those things started to take shape. Talk to me about that evolution.
Yeah, well, I mean, should we say athletics? I think my memory's right on this. My 4 years at Morningside, the most successful football season we had was 2 wins. Now, can we talk about the national championships now?
Yeah.
And I know the resistance of people who thought that we got much more prestige being in Division II. Well, okay, and we were successful sometimes, but it was really nice when only a few years after we changed, then here the women's basketball national championship. I mean, when had we ever had that at Morningside before? And of course, to play schools like ours, that was a wonderful change. My doctoral dissertation, by the way, had to do with Christian missions among Dakota people in southern Minnesota in the 1800s. Okay. And I've always been interested in Native American cultures and people. And so for a while, we had an Indian Studies department here. And I mean, all of that, in addition to religious studies, has been kind of close to my heart. Mm-hmm. And so that also interested me when we changed from Chiefs to Mustangs. And I know there are some alumni who are still bitter and they still want to be the Chiefs. But I would have been I was one of the advocates that we did need to make that change.
Yeah. Again, that evolution.
Yeah. We're within an hour here in Sioux City of 3 different reservations and have a substantial Native American population right here in the Sioux City area. Yeah. We have to not just have Native American people, indigenous people be mascots, right? I mean, we got to get past that. And I'm pleased with that.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up some of the research and things that you enjoy, at least even learning more about, because gosh, after Morningside and probably a lot during Morningside, now you're getting to be nationally known for some of your research.
Well,
and just have done incredible interviews and written books and things like that. Right. Talk to me about when that process really started.
Well, I think you have to evolve as a scholar, and I came out of programs that were strong enough that I always wanted to do papers and present at academic meetings. But yeah, eventually where I got my areas of expertise, one was in the analysis of popular culture and how it relates to religion. Because we have a strong Morningside tradition here of people who have been interested in popular culture analysis. That included Bob Jewett and John Lawrence in English, and especially also included Marty Knepper in the English. Well, I don't know who I said. Anyway, Jewett and Lawrence in religious studies and in philosophy, and Marty Knepper, who in English, who has been a national president of the Popular Culture Association and so on. Tim Orwig, when he was here, who's the author of our college histories, he was very involved with popular culture analysis. So there was kind of a tradition there, and I guess I slipped right into that tradition.
You did.
The problem is that if you looked at what the national meetings were doing, it was about all kinds of other topics, but they seldom brought up religion. So I felt we had to do that more at the popular culture level, but we also, in the academic religious studies meetings, we ought to have sessions on popular culture and religion, because they were doing popular culture and politics, popular culture and gender roles, popular culture and everything else. What about religion? And so this is bragging, but I was part of a two-person team, Jeffrey Mahan, my colleague at another school is the other, that we are the people who got an experimental session at one of the national AAR meetings, American Academy of Religion, and then on the basis of the success of that, got it started as a section within the American Academy of Religion. We're the people who started that. Now, that's not my doctorate. My doctorate's in the history of Christianity, but it was kind of a subspecialty because back then nobody got doctorates in popular culture analysis. But as a result, Jeffrey and I have co-edited a book called Religion and Popular Culture in America, which is now in its third edition, and it's used in lots of college classes. So that's one way that I guess I've made my mark. But the other is I really got interested in holidays. And the story for that is it really got started here at Morningside because one of our former choir directors, Michael Krieger, we always have a big Christmas concert, right?
He had Christmas at Morningside. I mean, it's an institution. People make sure to come back for that.
And he had the idea that he wanted to have a whole day of activities, not just the concert. And so let's have craft fair in the Commons, and let's have Swedish folk dancers and so on. And so as part of that, these are all during the day. He asked me if I would do an illustrated lecture on the history of Christmas. And I thought, that sounds interesting. And so I did, and I knew nothing about that because I do have a doctorate in the history of Christianity, but we didn't study holidays. We studied more boring things. And so over and over again, I just got surprised. I thought that was fun. When I presented, people thought it was really interesting. They said, you should write this down. And one of the lines I quote a lot is they say, but I don't want to read a 500-page book. And one person said, I'm curious, but I'm not obsessed.
There you go.
So I decided
you had to keep it pretty concise.
I wanted to write a book for general readers, not just for stuffy academics. And so it took me a while, but then I did this book on the history of Christmas. Subtitle is Candid Histories. Candid.
Okay. Gotcha.
Like people also want to know the real story instead of just everything's sugar-coated. And then sorry, I'm just talking away here. But then as a result of that, people said, well, you're going to write another book on another holiday. And I said, no, because Christmas is the biggest. And no, I'm not interested.
Sure.
But people would start asking me questions. Like I was asked to do an interview about Valentine's Day. I thought, what do I know about Valentine's Day? I just know about Christmas. But, give me 15 minutes, I could Google it, and then I could say something. But almost against my own inclinations, I started to learn about holidays, and I saw parallels between them, kind of common patterns. So then I did another book called America's Favorite Holidays, Candid Histories, which is very much like the Christmas book, but it's a chapter each on 5 holidays, which are Valentine's Day, Easter, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, which I think are the big ones. Yeah. And I look back on that because I'm reading books now in retirement, but I have a floor-to-ceiling shelf area that's just my Christmas library.
Really?
Why was I so interested in Christmas? And I think, okay, maybe I'm a slow learner on this, but what would be a perfect fusion of the history of Christianity and popular culture? Christmas. No wonder I'm interested in that
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah, because it is such a pop culture phenomenon. I mean, whether you think about the meals, the family, the shopping, the whole ceremony of it, if you will. I mean, and you were coming from an institution that very much so valued that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only a religious holiday, but also something that's very ingrained in our popular culture.
And there are lots of people who love Christmas, and they're not religious at all, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
or know the history of it. Meaning.
So it's a cultural thing that envelops people, in addition to being a Christian thing for people who are of Christian background. In fact, when people have arguments about Christmas and the rest, I've thought the first thing you have to think of is we've got two Christmases here. We have a Christian Christmas and kind of a cultural Christmas.
Yeah.
And many of us, me included, we celebrate both together, and we don't really think they're different. It's all one thing. But I think some people really like one more. Some are more focused on the other. A lot of people, they're all mixed together, and we never thought about it. But we have two dynamics going on.
Yeah. And especially because it might be a part of their popular culture traditions, or, that might be an introduction to religion for them. If they're not religious, but they're used to going to church on Christmas, or for Christmas.
But I also know, I know extended families who have, the big Christmas gatherings and all the decorations and the Dickens village in their house and all the rest. And, they haven't been, some have never been a member of a church or never gone to church, but it's still, Christmas is a big thing.
Yes.
And one of the other dramatic examples of this around the world, I think, is Japan. And I've learned about this from Greg Gulcher and his wife, who's Japanese, and other people. Half or more than half of people in Japan have Christmas trees and Christmas decorations and celebrate Christmas. Okay, 2% of the people in Japan are Christian. So you've got to call that a cultural Christmas. And where does it come from? But it excites people on many levels, and it's not just materialism. It could be the spirit of generosity. A lot of people, even who are not religious, would say we should have the Christmas spirit all year round. Yeah. It's still something to preserve. Yeah. You get me started. We'll go for 4 hours.
No, I think it's fascinating. It truly is. And so when you started, writing these books and kind of your thought was just evolving and your research centered around this, you were obviously still teaching at the time. How far into your tenure, or what year are we talking?
I'm trying to think. Probably halfway in that I start to get productive with books like that. Prior to that, I'd published articles and I published chapters in books, and so on. But yeah, probably halfway through the teaching. Wow. And when people ask, like we have Friday is writing day, that kind of thing. Yep. How do you write and the rest? First of all, I'd say I'm so busy teaching, I had to take year-long sabbaticals to finish any of those books. But the other is, I think I have an interesting way of approaching writing that when I tell people about that, they said, that sounds like a good idea, and I've never thought about it. And that is, I give presentations before I publish or before I even write articles. So, for instance, more recently, I've been working on the history of nativity scenes, which I didn't know I was, but I think I only give one sentence about that in my Christmas book. Okay. So I got interested in this. Well, what I do is I develop this, and usually a PowerPoint presentation in that, and I give it to a civic audience or a church audience. It's my way of pre-writing.
Yeah,
and
engaging your audience.
Well, first of all, it helps me take what I've learned and kind of start to organize it, because I've got to do that to give the speech.
A presentation.
And then I see what questions they have, and I see what interests them most in that, and then I develop it further. So if people want to know what is my writing process is to do presentations. That's my pre-writing, and then I produce articles or books.
It's like you're doing your own market research. Yeah, you're going and you're selling it to an audience and seeing what sticks.
And you get questions that I'd never thought to ask. I'll give you one example. Is I was giving a presentation on the campus of Virginia Wesleyan, invited by Craig Wansink, Morningside graduate, who teaches there and has been on our board. And I was giving something on Valentine's Day. This was one of my pre-writing. And in the question and answer session, one of the persons raised his hand, and I had already met him, and he was a science professor. He said, that red heart that we have, where did we get that symbol? And he said, I'm asking because I'm a scientist and I've held a heart in my hand and it does not look like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, good question. I never thought to ask that. So I have an answer in the book,
I
but
was
I
going to
didn't
say,
know.
Bruce, is this a teaser? Is that what you did? That's a teaser.
You'll
We
have
need
to
go
look
check
it
out
up.
the
That's
book.
right. That's right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
And
you
Craig sat there and he already had a quick answer, which was only partially right. I'll just say.
Okay. And because now you are, like you said, doing that with the nativity scenes, right? Like you said that you were just, or we mentioned that you were down in Sioux City doing a presentation surrounding that. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it's and a lot of this, I just am curious, and I'm just surprised. Yeah. So, for instance, I can't give you the whole thing, but let me give you an example of surprises. Now, when I grew up, I checked this with my brother. Our nativity scene in our house, we always called it a creche. But I didn't know what a creche was. Well, a creche was this, right? I didn't know what it meant. So in starting to do the research, I thought I should look it up. So creche is a French word, and it literally means crib. Crib, like a baby's crib.
Yeah.
And then I started looking up, because this is a Western Europe tradition, and then comes the United States. So I started looking up the words that they have in English and in Scandinavian languages and Italian and all that. And the language that they use, it's always a word that means crib. And now, if you talk to a French person, or in German, it's Krippe. What is a Krippe? They'd say a nativity scene, all those characters. But the word itself just is crib. I thought, now, does that change your life or anything? No, but I'm really curious.
Exactly. Fascinating still.
But then it became more interesting, because in the 1200s, there was a period of time before nativity scenes really took off, where there were some churches in the Netherlands and a little bit in France and Germany. I mean, not saying it was everywhere, but there were a number of places. And what they had up in front of the church was not a nativity scene. It was a crib. They had a very fancy decorated crib that would be wood carving. The wood carving almost made the crib look like a church. Okay. And sometimes the priest would rock the cradle and so on. So that's never dawned on me that might be another way to represent it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And anyway, and then you go on. The person who generally is credited with starting a nativity scene is Francis of Assisi, who I really admire anyway, so that interests me. And then there are things people misunderstand about that, but that's probably true. And then, of course, the current Pope is named Francis, honoring Francis of Assisi. And early in his papacy, he went on Christmas Eve one time back to the place that Francis had done the first living nativity. And then he issued a letter saying how important nativity scenes were. So when the first presentation I ever gave, I titled it "From St. Francis to Pope Francis," because they were bookends about this.
Yeah. Wow. And I know that this research and just kind of your curiosity has brought you to a lot of different places, and maybe interviews and things that you never even imagined. I mean, because I think people are curious much the way you are and want to know more. I mean, talk to me about maybe a favorite interview or something that stands out to you.
Well, the most high profile one, you want to know that?
Yeah.
Is when I was interviewed for CBS Sunday Morning. And they were going to do a segment on Silent Night, because it was the whatever anniversary of the song. And I think they were looking for some academic who might talk about it. And I mean, I don't know how the journalists
stumbled across your name.
And in fact, the working title I had for my Christmas book was "How Did Christmas Get to Be This Way?" which I like that as a title. But the publishers in that said, no, Christmas, A Candid History is better, partly because of computer searches. And my guess is maybe that's
search engine optimization.
Yeah, there you go. So they called me and talked to me about this, and then I think they wanted to have an academic in addition to the other pieces they were going to have as part of this story about
more than just the pop culture side of it. They wanted the religious aspect.
Well, they actually brought in there's some singers who travel around who are from the town in Germany where it was first performed. And so they had them sing, and it was a good presentation.
Powerful.
So for me, I was in the Christmas time, I'm often up in Minneapolis. So they came to my Minneapolis home, and it was the producer and then two, a sound person and a camera person, and moved around all the furniture in my living room, but still with my fireplace mantle and Christmas tree in the background, and interviewed me. And I'm only on there for 45 seconds or something total, but it was a big production. And I asked these guys, I mean, how much is this equipment worth? That I don't know, way more than $1 million. They said, it was sitting in my living room, and I
set up a production right there in your living room.
There you go. And I was on CBS Sunday Morning. I also was interviewed by a group of people who did documentaries, and they did a documentary on the history of Christmas. And so they flew me into one place and interviewed me for a couple of hours. And then again, a lot of what I told them appears in it, but it's not always me, face.
Yeah. And it's interesting where life will take you. Yeah. From Morningside College to Morningside University. And now we're thinking, CBS Sunday Morning.
Even this year in retirement, I got contacted by someone who worked for the New York City Public Library. And of course, everything is online because of COVID, but they wanted to do kind of a book discussion. And so they got me and one other person who had also published a book on Christmas. And so the two of us were interviewed in this public program sponsored by the New York Public Library. Wow. So, what am I doing in retirement? I did that too,
It's impressive. It's impressive, Bruce, that's for sure. So you're teaching, you're researching, you're writing, you're doing all those things. I got to imagine there are classes that you taught or individuals or students, anything that kind of just memories that stick out to you. We talk a lot about Morningside's culture and the culture of that, and you spoke to that earlier. Mm-hmm. Are there any memories you think that really just are indicative of that or just really stand out to you over that tenure?
Well, a flood, I don't know how to sort those out. Can I say one of the most touching ones was we have these May-term trips, and I led 3 May-term trips each year with different people, with other faculty, to Alaska. And they were great experiences. And I gave everybody a composition book and said, you have to write a minimum of a page a day. And that was part of the requirement for the trip. And at the end, there was one person, most people handed me the composition books on the plane on the way back, and I had them graded by the time we landed. Yeah. It wasn't really graded.
Yeah.
And, but one person was still working on it, and I knew that she was behind because she would write pages and do scriptures, little sketches and so on. She was still working on it on the plane. Yeah. And I thought, okay, when we land, we landed and she still wasn't ready to give it to me and said, could I have a few more days, which she did. And finally, she called me and said, I'm ready. Can I bring it over to you? And I said, yes. And she said, this just touches me. She said, I'm almost going to cry about this. Yeah. She said, I think the reason I couldn't finish is because once I did, then the trip would be over.
Yeah.
Whoa, Yeah,
and
I would say with experiences like that, the one other fantastic experience, I keep misstating that word, one of the most fantastic experiences for me is the way I finished my teaching, and that was that Heather Reed has really organized these semesters in Italy and has had different faculty go with her.
Yeah.
And she had invited me to go before, but I just hadn't been able. And so it was about ready for me to retire. So this is my last chance. So my last semester teaching at Morningside was not on this campus. It was in Sicily with Heather Reed and 17 students. And for me as well as for them, it's a once in a lifetime experience. And you're not just traveling or visiting. We lived there. It was
and are learning while you're there. Yeah, it's not necessarily just a vacation. It's a learning experience.
Yeah, when people say, how was the vacation? I said, listen, I'm teaching 2 courses. We're grading papers. We're doing all the rest. Yeah. But besides all of that emphasizes the importance of experiential learning.
Yeah.
which is, I think, one of the things that we do fairly well here at Morningside.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And the emphasis that's put on them
Exactly.
at an institution
It's part of the
such as
plan.
ours. Yeah.
But in addition, just the courses themselves, I just think I've grown. And again, looking back over 40 years of teaching, it's been interesting for me to reflect on it now. For instance, almost every year, I would teach a Christian ethics course, and I let students choose the topics that they wanted to talk about, and I'd add a couple to them or something. And so when I look back, I can see at certain points they were talking about the nuclear freeze. You probably don't even know what that's about, but that was one of the big ethical issues at a certain time. But others, I can see how things have changed. As we know, attitudes toward homosexuality, or now we'd say LGBTQ people, you know that there's been a great evolution in society. Well, I can see that in my Christian ethics class. You know, what were the views and what were the discussions like the first year I taught it and the last year I taught it. It's like I'm seeing society, and it's not all just what I'm teaching. What I'm trying to provide in the classroom is a chance for people to share other views and yet be reflective about them. And what did I hear those students say 40 years ago or more recently? It's really interesting to reflect on.
Yeah, and just have them think critically about these different topics, share their experiences and share their life story. I'm sure that was moving.
Yeah, my goal was almost to have the classes be practice session about how we can discuss things in a civil manner, which I think is desperately needed in this society. And maybe instead of us getting better, I think maybe we've gotten worse. We still need to learn that.
We do. So that last semester in Italy, that was the bookend to your teaching career. And now we're going on and just continuing to do research and presentations.
Yeah, I do. That's why I'm not sure retirement's the word. It's true that I don't have the same kinds of deadlines and pressures, and that's true. But I guess I feel I never sit down and say, gee, I have nothing to do today.
Yeah.
So different people retire. There are different kinds of retirement, and some simply can't do for whatever reason. The job isn't there, or the tasks aren't available, or whatever. They just can't do what they used to do. So you got to find something new to do in retirement. But for others, it's just you change the pace and do it in a different way. And I'm pretty busy doing that, which is probably a matter of my personality.
Yeah, your work isn't done. That's for sure. And it's always great to have you back on campus. I mean, when we're thinking about how far Morningside has come, both with its physical transformation or even its school of thought or representation with students on the board, I mean, we've come a long ways. As you look to the future, I mean, where do you see Morningside fitting in on that, and where do you see us going in the coming years?
Well, I really like the way it's poised. I've already said that because I think it's poised to move into the future with strength. And what I also said earlier is I think the promise for its future, and it is the personal relationships we have here. I mean, I'm very aware of online learning, and of course we have successful master's degree programs and so on. But the real life-changing experience that a small liberal arts private college can be, I still think is what can make us stand out from other options.
Yeah.
And I'm excited by that possibility. I haven't met the new college president, but everything I see about his background, he's about those kinds of things too. So the personal dimension, and we've already established such standards of quality at this school that I can it's good that it can be a launch.
Yeah.
And I predict that's what it will be. Yeah.
Yep. And that you can be hopeful for the future, that we continue on this upward trajectory. That's for sure.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, I know I consider myself blessed to have had you in a classroom and being able to learn from you. And so it's awesome to have you here, have you back on campus, be able to pull you back here and to have this conversation about your career, your life, and your impact on Morningside. So thanks for coming to Inside Mside. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.